The gospel is his death, burial, and resurrection and the sacrifice for sin. Yep, that's part of the gospel. But the thing with the gospel is that it's the people that say this never understand why he even had to die, what the Spirit is. Like, you don't understand the depth of the gospel. The gospel, to put it simply, is Luke 1:72 and Deuteronomy 4:13. The Messiah came to remember the Holy Covenant, which is refreshing the Holy Covenant made at Horeb, because Acts 3 tells you, go and learn what Moses said about the Messiah, so that you know the foundational prophecy of the Messiah and what he's going to come and teach. You go to Deuteronomy 18 and it says he's going to teach everything desired at Mount Horeb. Go to Deuteronomy 5 to see what that is. It's the Ten Commandments. It tells you nothing more was added to the Ten Commandments. This was the covenant to set his people apart. And they said, yep, all that you've said we will do. And it set them apart as a peculiar people. Now it makes sense why Peter says that we're a peculiar people, a holy nation, because we keep the Holy Covenant, and that's what makes us the peculiar people. Not because we keep the added sacrificial law. So nothing else was added to the Holy Covenant until Israel transgressed with the golden calf, and then the schoolmaster was added. That's the gospel, that's the refreshing of the covenant, right? And that's in its milk form, because the gospel gets so deep. That's the milk. He came to refresh the Holy Covenant, so because he did that, when we set our heart to obey the Spirit that he gave us, so again, the Spirit of grace and truth, grace is conviction. When God convicts your heart to keep his Holy Covenant and you're aware that I've sinned against God, I've realised there's a God now, because I know for me, I didn't even really believe in God. He convicts you. Once you obey that and you start to have faith that that is God convicting you and you start to obey it, that is your faith, and you can be saved, because God's Spirit dwells with those who seek to obey that Spirit of grace. And then when God dwells with you, that's you receiving the Spirit of truth. That's the gospel in a nutshell. And then also he came to remember the Holy Covenant and perform the mercy. That is end in sacrificial law. Daniel tells us that the Messiah is going to come and anoint the Most Holy. That's his blood spilling on the mercy seat, because Ron Wyatt found the Ark of the Covenant. It was underneath the crucifixion site. When the Messiah's blood shed, it went through a crack in the rock and landed on the mercy seat, thus fulfilling the prophecy that Daniel said, and he anointed the Most Holy. And that was how his blood on the mercy seat ended the sacrificial law and released the Holy Spirit. He literally became the sacrifice. The only worthy sacrifice, the perfect sacrifice. It's amazing. And that's the witness in the earth that John talks about as well. But I'm not really talking about that. So again, this is like the milk of the gospel. But I want to talk about Matthew 24, because the apostles say, Yeshua, what is the sign of your second coming? And he says, be not deceived. He's talking about the apostasy of the church. He's talking about the many false prophets, false teachers. That's what a false prophet is. Someone saying the word says this, the Lord said this, and he didn't say it. So that's anyone teaching bullshit doctrine, basically. Many are going to come in his name saying he's the Messiah. I believe the Messiah of the Bible, but they're going to deceive many. That's the apostasy of the church that Paul talks about in 2 Thessalonians 2. The great falling away. It's the great apostasy. That's why we're told, the Messiah says, come out of the church, my people, in Revelation 17 and 18. So that we be not partaker of her sins. Because she's breaking the Ten Commandments and teaching others to do so. So she's going to go where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. And he's saying, my people, come out of her. You thought I was there. I'm not there. I'm telling you to come out of her. The people who stay there, it's because they're not really with Yeshua. They love Babylon. Matthew 24, going through all of the afflictions and persecutions of the fifth seal, going into the sixth seal, which is the fifth seal just before Great Tribulation happens. He's saying, just before his second coming, there's going to be wars and rumours of wars, even what's going on in Judea, especially what's going on in Judea. Wars and rumours of wars, the great apostasy, false prophets, many coming in his name, deceiving many. And it says, and because sin shall abound, holy covenant breaking shall abound, the love of many will wax cold. Because the church is breaking the Ten Commandments, they're not teaching anyone the Ten Commandments. They don't have the love of God or neighbour in their heart. But those who endure until the end, meaning those who do love God and neighbour, they will be saved. So, the gospel, again, you can put it this way, the gospel is loving God and neighbour. True. Because loving God is the Messiah quote in Deuteronomy 4 to 8, really, but especially Deuteronomy 6, where it says, you keep the Holy Covenant, You teach it to your children so that they can live long in the land. And then when God starts teaching you prophecy through the Spirit of truth that you've received because you've been baptized with the life-giving water, which is the Ten Commandments, you get the Spirit of truth that teaches you prophecy, and you never despise prophecy, which means you accept. It's bitter, it's sweet in the mouth, but it's bitter in the belly because you realize God's teaching you the Bible, you finally understand the prophets. But then it's bitter in your belly when you digest it because the message and knowing that you're going to be hated for preaching it. Because when you tell people about Isaiah 3, they're going to accuse you of all kinds. The reason why we preach Isaiah 3 is so that it doesn't happen to them. I don't want women to be raped and their children to be dashed to pieces. I don't want their men to be killed at war. So I want them to listen and return to the Holy Covenant. It's that simple. God has always judged people for not keeping the Holy Covenant. He's judged his people for breaking the Holy Covenant. That's always how it is. Look at Leviticus 26. That's what's happening right now. So Matthew 24 is going through like all of these tumultuous times before on the eve of his approach, basically. And it says, because sin shall abound, the love of many will wax cold, but those who endure until the end, meaning those who have the love still, which is rebuking sin, loving your neighbour, is a commandment of old that's been refreshed, renewed. That's what John's talking about in Leviticus 19. Those who endure in that commandment will be saved. And then it says, and this gospel will be preached unto all nations as a witness against them, because they're not going to listen. The people preaching the gospel are the watchmen. That's why the Messiah called us to watch. Ezekiel 2:3 and 33, the call to the watchman calling, is essentially how to love your neighbour as yourself. So when the Messiah says, loving your neighbour is the greatest commandment, he's telling us to rebuke sin and warn them of the coming prophecy. When he tells us to watch, like he told the porter to watch, he's telling us to rebuke people and warn them of prophecy. He speaks in idioms. He's saying the same thing over and over again. That's why he told us that he commanded us to go into all nations, the Gentiles, aka the lost sheep of the house of Israel, to preach everything that he taught. Because he taught the Ten Commandments so that we could receive the Spirit of truth. And then those who receive the Spirit of truth will be able to teach people the prophets and the parables that he spoke. That's what that means. It's like, but people just don't want to hear it because they won't even keep the simple holy covenant that the Messiah even taught, that he refreshed. They don't get that because the church has lied to them. So it says, this gospel will be preached as a witness against the people who don't listen. And it's the same language as Moses introduces Deuteronomy 32 and Deuteronomy 31. So he literally says, this song will be sang as a witness against them. And what's Deuteronomy 32 about? Everything the Messiah just said in Matthew 24. It's all the same thing. Deuteronomy 32 is all about Israel being scattered into the Gentiles, and then they were bought without price, meaning the Messiah's blood, because the Messiah was trying to reconcile them back to God through keeping the Holy Covenant, because that's how they can receive the Spirit of truth. But they spat in his face, and they pulled a Romans 11 when Paul said, never do the thing that Israel did to get divorced from God. They did it anyway. It was the Ashtaroth pole, the Christmas tree. So they just went and did it anyway. It says your rock is not our rock, because they didn't build the house on the rock at Horeb. They built the house on the sand. It's talking about Mystery Babylon, just like the Messiah is in Matthew 7. They didn't build their house upon the Ten Commandments, so when Satan's cast down over them, and the floods come and the winds blow, great will be the fall of that house. Their rock is not our rock. Deuteronomy 32 is all about Israel being scattered into the Gentiles, God trying to reconcile them back, but then they do pagan idolatry. Did the very thing that Israel did to get divorced. And then in the latter days, through God's Spirit, he raises up a group of people to warn that very church, to even that nation, Mystery Babylon, to repent from the pagan idolatry, and they won't listen and they're hated for it. And these become the very elect. And the only people in Revelation 14 that know that new song is the very elect. The only people that are going to know the gospel, Matthew 24 and Deuteronomy 32, it's the same thing. The only people that are going to know the true gospel and the new song of Moses is the very elect. The gospel is something to be obeyed. This is part of the gospel. Of course it is. We wouldn't be able to do it without this, but you don't understand that part.